let's get started here. There I was. Rain dumping down sheets in sunny Los Angeles, thinking about how much I hate climate change. A silver lining, albeit a dark one, occurred to me. With all the rain, there weren't going to be any fires. There I was, starved, fueled by coffee jitters and unhealthy pastries, worried about getting to the airport on time to get home to my family. On yet another job site, dealing with a grumpy contractor whose fear of new things was literally threatening the future of our planet. Breaking my heart, trying to switch the project to spray foam, my arch nemesis. There I was, a bucket of liquid applied air sealing goop, exploded all over the rest of the materials we'd provided. Having to justify my very existence to the multimillionaire client, their lawyer, the grumpy builder, and the bewildered architect who didn't want to admit we were friends anymore. What a bummer. How the heck am I going to explain all this? Have them understand why this is worth the effort and save this project from conventional crap? Well, what I wanted to say was, look, you freaking thankless, spoiled idiots. It's hard time on planet Earth, and your research on YouTube isn't actually science. So please stop standing in the way of progress and be appreciative you have passionate professionals trying to create a healthy, durable, low-impact, high-performance house that, frankly, you don't seem to deserve. Why I wanted to say that? Well, we can no longer accept less bad. We can no longer accept incremental changes. We must demand truly good from the ground up. After decades of work and thousands of projects, I firmly believe that people's emotions and excuses are insufficient reason to ignore the health and future of their community and their planet. We must admit it is a great privilege to build a building, especially a custom home, and a great privilege to own property in the first place. You are the steward of your project and your place. With great privilege comes great responsibility, right? You need to do the right things for your family and your planet. And guess what? I hate to say it, but green building is no longer good enough. It has become too muddled and too driven by BS instead of building science. The American capitalist machine took it over and we didn't hold on tight enough. What we need is truly good building, which takes a more holistic and deeper view. Or maybe we could just call it eco building. Just like a delicious meal, we need to use truly good products regardless of the recipe. You know, it's great if you're served a wonderful looking meal, but if it's made out of like unhealthy, GMO material, ingredients with like rotten meat in it, it's not going to be that great overall. Of course, like the design's fine, but the actual delivery is not possible without good ingredients. But since getting sued isn't fun and also not effective at creating the change we desperately need, what I actually said was, all right, everyone, let's get some things straight. Construction is the art of managing chaos. It is an emotional roller coaster, and it's easy to let that spiral out of control. We need to remind ourselves of the greater context and that outdated social norms and bad habits govern our interactions. In other words, we're human. We need to stop talking about the how and the what of this project and get back to our shared why that brought us together in the first place. We need to think how we can improve ourselves and our culture and then change what we can control. So everyone take a deep breath. And seriously, I mean this right now, live too. I need a sip of water so you guys can take a deep breath while I do that. Hold it in for a moment and think of why you're doing this, and then let it out. I just want to take a second to note that with our shared work, we give a great gift to the world. I was raised kind of as a hippie, so what I'd say is it's our love for each other and our world trying to manifest itself into better buildings. Frustratingly, we haven't done nearly enough yet. Like the Lorax encouraged me as a child, encourages my children, even read this book to them last night. How do we get people to care enough to matter a whole awful lot? Well, I think we start by telling our stories, by sharing our why with colleagues and clients, instead of focusing so much on the how and what. We change culture by changing conversations. This allows us to take a non-emotional, data-driven approach to delivering truly good buildings. But how the heck do we quantify good building? Well, after many years, I'm happy to share the beta-tested version of what I call the 5 factors of good building. Before we get too far, I want to note that you're my respected peers, and the next step is to receive your feedback and hopefully take an open source collaborative approach moving forward. We're planning to host this as an open source nonprofit tool where a small donation allows you to use the tool, a bigger donation, the tool can be used for you basically. And the idea is to have something that helps projects of all scales or looks at products, you'll see more about this, but helps take a more quantitative view of holistically good building. It's also important to note that affordability, scalability, and constructability are, of course, key elements of success. They don't make the cut. These things are only worth achieving if we've determined that a project is worth building first. Plus, these tend to be core goals of all projects, whether they're good or bad. So let's get to the details here. Before we discuss the how and what of good building, as I've been saying, we first must address the why, right? So let's tell our stories. Let's tell the why before the how and the what. If you guys haven't seen this presentation, I imagine you have, because I think it's the most viewed TED Talk ever or something like that. Simon Sinek has this presentation, The Power of Why. And really the main thing is the goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe, who share the why, because there's always going to be bumps in the road. And if you share the why, you can deal with that because you're just trying to achieve something. You understand it's worth doing. But if it's just the how and the what, we lose a lot of projects. As a culture anthropology professor, my wife has taught me that culture is often the core driver and far more important than technical barriers or costs. Culture is like a tanker ship, though. It takes a long time to change direction. And our culture is one of idealism, individualism, and stubbornness. We're more interested in marketing than science. You could say that marketing trumps science. We choose to focus on the gilded goods rather than peeking behind the curtain. Just like COVID, climate change is a massive issue that affects everyone. It will not spare rich or poor, but the privileged will certainly feel it less. So why is it that those who will be most affected by climate change are in the regions that deny it most vehemently? The entire West Coast is on fire, burning conservative communities to dust with clear science explaining why it happens, and yet some of them still trust Fox News anchors over actual scientists. Our culture has been called cancel culture recently, which is kind of a dumb term in my opinion. But one thing we shouldn't have canceled is Captain Planet. He's effectively, or actually they really, were effectively a multi-gender, mixed-race superhero who's fueled by love and who used science to save the world. That's where my Instagram handle, @Science2Save the World, that's where that comes from. It's pretty sweet if you ask me. This is my favorite show, 19 to 92, Ted Turner. Actually, I guess helped write it himself, but you know what? We weren't ready for it. So our stubbornness and independence creates our own distorted reality with our often arbitrary rules. Yet some of us pretend they're the only valid ones that exist. We say stuff like, there's no way we can change our economy, right? Well, we found out that's not true recently. And when disaster strikes, we talk about the economy first. This is probably my favorite cartoon ever. As I showed you, you guys probably saw this at the Slam. And the powers that be, they make sure we stay too busy arguing over the scraps of the economy and to rise up and demand real change, right? So for some reason, the pandemic has brought another dark silver lining. Our massive shared acts of compassion have opened a unique window in time where real deep systematic changes are possible. Frustratingly, you can already feel the forces of normalization and the powers that be trying to slam shut that window. But screw normal. If we're honest, we have been destroying the world so that the 1% can have a silly amount of money while most people suffer. I know we all want to make a positive difference. We want to help solve the climate crisis along with the social justice crises that occur more and more, it seems. to do work that matters in our communities and our planet. A very smart friend of mine posted this amazing image. It says, our greatest fear should not be failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't really matter. And speaking of what matters, Black lives matter. So do Latinx lives, which are particularly hard hit in our industry. And there's also significant structural violence against impoverished white communities. As you know, I'm a soccer fanatic, and one of the highlights the entire year for me has been seeing the global soccer community come together to, to this day, every game starts with all players kneeling. They all have patches on their jerseys in Champions League, the most watched sport event in the planet. It's amazing how this scaled up and became a global movement. And it's because it's a social movement, and we're going to get into that. The other thing is the overlap of systemic racism, climate change, and coronavirus. And coronavirus can be replaced by every pandemic that's coming down the pipeline. Environmentalists need to be anti-racist, right? It's all part of the same thing. The numbers don't lie too, right? We need to go back to science and look at data. It shows that the odds are brutally unfair. And what we could have seen as an almost comedically bad, evil empire trying to maintain the power structure at the cost of many lives. I love this so much. This is quite funny from a, I guess, millennial perspective. But we, the people in our industry, are often all too complicit, since racism can also look like this. This is a provocative, powerful, and accurate statement. Not all Trump supporters are racist, but all of them decided that racism isn't a deal breaker. Own it. This is just another more specific, targeted towards our industry version of the same statement. Not all people who specify spray foam deny climate change and structural violence, but all of them decided those aren't deal breakers. You need to own that. One of my favorite comedians puts it perfectly. If someone opposes my beliefs respectfully, I can respect them right back. But I will not respect someone who opposes human rights or science. Those aren't beliefs. Those are inalienable truths. And that is the distinction I draw. We must address these root issues that tragically define too much of our culture. The rejection of science by labeling it as a belief system is a core problem. Science is the opposite of a belief system. Science is based on trying to reject ideas or hypotheses based on unbiased data collection. Science never asks for faith. Clearly, not all science has been good, and certainly much of it has been biased towards headline-worthy findings and, corporate profits, but we literally don't have a better way to determine objective truth than the scientific method. If you've got a better one, please let me know. That'd be great. Even deeper than a rejection of science is a rejection of humanity, though. It's clearly in evidence when you see kids being sexually assaulted in freaking cages after being torn from their parents at our borders. It's easy to see when we let unhoused people sleep in the rain. It's easy to see when Black lives are extinguished by power-high people acting out of fear. These things need to change. We have choices to change our culture. We could engage in data-driven debates without emotion or politics to help those who suffer. We could enjoy getting the chance to open our minds and change ourselves based on new ideas. Because we have some serious stuff to deal with, and we need to be a team. Or, more eloquently put, I won't read this because there may be young people listening. I figure if you can read these words, you're mature enough to understand them. As a society, and especially as those that respect science, it is important to take pride in changing our opinions when we're presented with new data. I'll say, I installed hundreds of thousands of square feet of spray foam. That probably surprises some people. But the reason I hate it so much is because as a scientist, I had to collect data, reject my own hypothesis, and admit I had had a massive failure in my 20s that basically wiped out all the carbon savings I'd worked for to create, over a decade. So I hate foam for that reason, right? You know, the other thing too is it's far too long since we've blamed ourselves as individuals and have struggled against all odds to create a sustainable society through living sustainable lives. And while that's a beautiful thing, and obviously we should keep doing that, the data shows that this matters for many reasons, right? That's what I was just saying, such as health and connection to each other. But for climate change, it really doesn't do much. That's a tough pill to swallow, but it really doesn't do much. We need to take systematic action to address the big 100 carbon criminals. I don't know if someone else has coined that. I might be quoting that. But there's 100 corporations that cause 71% of emissions. That is effing nuts. Let's stay focused on that. But that will never happen unless our culture demands action. Excuse me. We have a lot of curves to flatten. Climate justice isn't negotiable. Planet Earth has nothing to lose, and we have everything to lose. Climate action is about the future of humanity, not about protecting some faraway environment or some exotic species, although those should be protected too for their own right. The planet will be just fine and probably better off if we keep killing our future. And maybe we should add police violence and structural violence to the list of curves to flatten. Love this sign. Treat racism like COVID-19. Assume you have it. Listen to experts about it. Don't spread it. Be willing to change your life to end it. Perfect. And let's maybe add this to the curves to flatten too. It's so unfair. We ask people to suit up, risk lives to install insulation with massive carbon impact. And, you know, we need to assume we're part of the problem. We have to listen to the experts. We need to do our best to be anti-racist, anti-toxicity, and anti-climate change. Being passively against these things is not enough. It is almost worse because you're lying to yourself about being separate from the problems. We must be actively anti-bad and pro-good. We can't passively say, whatever, it isn't my problem as long as it meets efficiency targets or clients' goals or whatever, right? It's not enough anymore. This is a hard one. I spend a lot of time bragging about my projects and my accomplishments. This comes from a childhood where failure was the dominant feeling I remember. I'm not saying this for pity. I've lived a great, privileged life, but it's more to take a second to say I recognize this tendency I have. I mean, Palo Alto, growing up there in the dot-com boom was boiler, just unbelievable pressure. But the point is, it just kind of taught me to act in a certain way, which is such a dominant white male of acting, way of acting. So if I've talked over you ever before, my apologies. I just get really stoked about things. And while my intent is always to help improve our world, I think these efforts often fall short because I don't call myself out for this privileged position. And I focus so much on the how and what rather than the why. And our community tends to coalesce around awesomely nerdy details, as can be evidenced in this quote from Zach Semke that you see at the top here, summarizing a presentation from Chris Magwood, two of my favorite people. However, again, this is the what and how. This isn't the why. Our message isn't likely to scale unless we can help people deeply understand why they should care a whole awful lot about these things. So why do we build such barriers to changing our ways? Why do we have such a hard time asking why rather than what or how? I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. I didn't plan to talk about this, but I would throw out a little side joke. Maybe it's because we tell our young kids to stop asking us why all the time, and then that becomes something that gets ingrained in our mind. I know I never stopped asking, but I'm sure I annoyed the hell out of my parents. Anyway, the term I've come up with it, and I'm sure social scientists have better terms and more accurate terms, or maybe someone's come up with this term, but cultural momentum seems like a relatively accurate way to describe it. There's this thing called The Tale of Two Horses, which is a really fascinating story. And basically, some Roman emperor back in the day decided that roads should be roughly 2 horses wide so that their chariots could easily go down the roads. And that's maintained itself as the road spec all the way through modern times, to the point where space shuttle components are that wide so that they can go down the freeway in one lane. So it's crazy to think about that. Like, we just don't think about certain things. They're just assumed. That's the point. So it's hard to trace back to the actual moment when this width was specified, or indeed if that ever really was specified by someone specifically, or if someone just built one and they're like, okay, that works. But that's kind of the point. These things, again, that we just simply assume to be true because we haven't seen it done another way, and we've seen it that way forever. So it's just so human that space shuttle components are 2 horses wide because of a spec from, Roman Empire days. The magic of our society, though, is that we can change once we notice the patterns. So I've coined this term I'm calling the efficiency trap. And bear with me as I read through this. It's a little bit of it's kind of long, but the idea is we started with this thing where, shoot, bad building isn't working out, or conventional building, we can call it. But let's be honest, again, we can't be, just conventional. We have to call it what it is, bad. We have to be anti-conventional. So bad building isn't working out. Well, we need good building. Well, that should be healthy, comfortable, affordable, low carbon, durable, and socially equitable. Wow, wonderful targets. Notice how none of that says efficiency. All right. So, okay, but good needs to be quantified and green is too political. So let's talk about it as energy efficiency. Cool, solid plan. How do we do it? Well, let's maximize efficiency and collect data focused on proving efficiency was delivered efficiently, and that all made people more efficient. But that's not really the goal. Oh, don't worry, we'll sneak in the green. Wow, efficiency really caught on. Now we need certification systems for efficiency, and big money interests are now funding things. So we need to just focus on efficiency since that's the data we have. Wow, Passive House perfected efficiency. The world is saved. Oh, snap. It turns out high performance just amplifies things. It looks nice in energy models, but bad high performance is the worst building yet in terms of carbon impact and health and all kinds of things. What about the original goals of health, comfort, durability, embodied carbon, social justice stuff? Efficiency wasn't the goal. That was the market-driven excuse for our capitalist culture. It's neither bad nor good, it's just efficient. And then we're back at the beginning of the cycle. And until we have a way to quantify good, this cycle continues, right? So this is a more fun way to put it. My 5-year-old, this is Hazel. You guys all met her, at least at the Slam many years ago when she was 9 months old. She's seen enough guild events by now to get it. Tyvek, really? That's just so lazy. And it's just not good. We'll get into why later, but like, really? And my business partner, Austin, when someone suggests foam insulation, look, this is his kid at 1 year old. He gets it, right? So we got to demand good building based on using truly good products. There's no magical emergent property where we can be like, hey, let's mix together a bunch of less bad stuff and all of a sudden we're going to get a good building. It doesn't work that way. So this is a photo of the Green Point project on Vancouver Island, which is the world's first triple certified Passive House Living Building Challenge, Green Shores. Had a lot of DIY love. It's an owner, builder, architect, professor on Victoria Island who did this. With a lot of donated labor from some wonderful local builders. So it was a reasonable scope and it was pretty darn cost effective for truly good high performance, but there's no way this project would be accessible to the large majority of people, including myself. So it's not about high performance or low performance. Good building is more fundamental. Just like a top chef, we can solve many problems by requiring good ingredients as the basis for our work. I'm not a great chef, but I love cooking food, and all I do is put together good ingredients, and the meals turn out great. Good addresses the why as much as possible before jumping into the how and what. So to illustrate that good is more fundamental than high performance versus low performance, those are more just adjectives, right? I'll use my house in Tucson as an example. So my wife got offered her dream job at U of A, so suddenly we're forced to move a few years ago. We still try to spend our summers up in Seattle to see all you lovely people up there. But we got, lucky to find an awesome place. Awesome location, cool brick wall, otherwise needed some pretty deep renovations, but we could afford it. The original layout of this house was the first time I'd seen a gas vented dryer co-located and co-vented with an open draft water heater. If anyone's a BPI building analyst out there, holy crap, that is that is scary. Beyond belief, combustion safety failure is probably top 5 worst I've seen. And not to mention that natural gas can never be more than less bad. It's a band-aid given to us by the fossil fuel industry to keep us addicted to their products. So natural gas needed to go, right? Our biggest problem in a carbon sense, though, is that we were charging our electric car and running our home on some of the highest carbon impact electricity in the nation. Having just moved from Seattle, where our house is connected to Seattle City Light, which offers the lowest carbon electricity to my knowledge, this was a really big surprise. Like, how was electricity so much worse than, gas from the, fuel, the gas station? I have almost forgotten the name of what one of those are because it's been so long since I've been to one now, which is a great feeling. Well, it turns out Tucson Electric Power gets 70% of their power mix from coal and 20% from natural gas, where Seattle City Light has 97% low to zero carbon portfolio. So that makes a massive difference. It's about 20 times higher pounds of carbon per kilowatt hour on the grid in Tucson. So I have presentations dedicated to the subject I'm happy to share later, but the short version is that we need to speak directly in terms of carbon. I don't care how many kilowatt hours you save with a passive house or whatever, I care how much carbon is saved net. So clearly sticking with Tucson Electric Power and natural gas didn't fit the morals of our family, but we were pretty darn broke after buying a house. So what were we gonna do? And my instinct from a few decades of work on low carbon buildings had me thinking that high performance was the only goal. Well, I priced out high performance. Still need to take a sip, I guess, to calm myself down. Because it's different to be on the potential client side of the table looking at a budget. I think a lot of us spend a lot of our careers pricing out and working on projects that we frankly could never afford. But was high performance really the goal? It wasn't. My goals were effectively what became these 5 factors of good building. They were health, comfort, durability, low carbon, and social justice. So was truly good low performance a thing that could really happen? It turns out that it's indeed feasible, and actually it was fun. So it needs to be discussed more often as a viable path. It's very low embodied carbon, for instance. Here's the details. So we spent less than 5K out of pocket, mostly because we wanted new appliances and the gas had to go. We went 100% LED. We have, laptops, and I have my iMac here, and that's about it. So very low plug loads. 6.5 kW solar PV, charging our electric volt with that too. It's been cash flow positive. Once we get rid of the pool pump, we'll be 105% net positive. Disappointingly, we're at like 95% last year because of this damn old pool pump. It uses 30% of our overall electricity for the pool in the backyard. Just the freaking pump, including all of our family's life and the car. The pool pump's 30%. So that thing obviously has to go. I just don't want to get rid of it before it breaks. Anyway, healthy, durable, comfortable, and extremely low carbon. That is the result of this, but it's an extremely low performance house still. This is an original 1947 brick house with collectors, like museum level windows, single pane aluminum. It's like everything that we as a community say is horrible, but it was built before air conditioning was a thing. So there's great shading. The house works really well. And with some solar, we could basically be off grid if we put some batteries on there and got rid of the pool pump. So anyway, let's talk about some of these principles of core principles of good building that came out through this process. It's really designed to be, as Einstein once said, a system to find simplicity on the other side of complexity. There's a lot of complexity that goes into these decisions, but we need to make them as simple as possible if they're going to be able to scale. And it's based on forcing a holistic process that focuses on why as much as what and how. You're going to hear me say that probably 20 more times if you haven't written it down by now. It's anti-racist. As mentioned, I've learned that you cannot be racist or colorblind or whatever, just not racist and I'm colorblind. That doesn't exist. There's only racist and anti-racist, right? And a beautiful element of that thought structure is that it means at various times we are all both racist and anti-racist with our beliefs and the policies that we support. So it takes away maybe a bit of the edge from that term and allows us to address it in a more open way. There's a really wonderful book called How to Be Anti-Racist I would very much recommend reading. It was life-changing, honestly. Good building is anti-conventional, which is really the same thing as saying anti-crap or anti-less bad, if we're honest. We can't create good through less bad, so we have to be anti-less bad. And it's anti-technocratic, right? Doesn't mean that it can't have smart building technology. That stuff's really cool, but like Lloyd Alter of Treehugger wrote, the answer to our predicament, it's a hard word, today is not to throw off technology and return to the primitive hut, but instead is to synthesize our understanding of natural systems and selectively use technology that provides great benefits with manageable environmental impacts. Lloyd Alter, writing in Treehugger, notes that our current obsession with energy efficiency and high performance as realized in the Passive House standard is not enough. As another example of what anti-technocratic means, I'd like to share ideas from a fascinating book called Life Inc. by Douglas Rushkoff. We too often end up with poor results when we apply technology without changing culture and without understanding the core goals. A core goal of capitalism is to extract wealth from the less powerful and to consolidate that wealth amongst the powerful. This isn't some theory. It is literally what was written into the original incorporation documents for what is often considered the world's first corporation, the East India Tea Company. You can read a lot more about this in the book, but the short version is that the merchant class, which was kind of the first middle class, was disrupting power structures and racial dynamics because a bunch of non-white males of lower class were getting rich enough to not care about the reality the rich desired to enforce. So effectively, the corporation was created to solidify a tax base and take power back into the hands of a few. The 1% was literally the goal from the start. And guess what? So far, I've quoted a bunch of white males, which honestly and sadly I didn't catch until writing this. And that's likely that whole cultural momentum thing I mentioned earlier. I'm again not going to read this one out loud just in case there's younger people watching. Yeah, go Dolly Parton. I'm going to let you simmer on that for a sec while I take a sip. Because this next thing is kind of tough, but I wanted to just kind of publicly put this out there as a statement and a commitment. And kind of hurts to call yourself out, but it's important. So I've learned to talk about myself, but I don't know how others feel about having their stories told. This might be justified, but it's also selfish, and this isn't about me. I'm a privileged cis white male, and after trying to listen, I've come to understand it's my responsibility to use my privilege to force some important conversations. This conversation about racism and structural violence should be led by those affected by it, not by a white male who's sadly implicit in the power structure that causes these issues. However, when I have approached the BIPOC I know in our industry, they have been hesitant to shake the power structure. This is for very good reasons. In their position, it could be a huge risk to their livelihood to push a politically divisive topic. Many have overcome great odds to hold their positions. I imagine it feels like a tentative hold with society pulling you down. In positions of privilege, it's our duty to be allies by forcing this conversation until it is safe to be led by the right people. It would be ironic at this point to say I know who the right people are, but I very much hope it becomes safe for them to step forward to solidify the changes we so badly need. And of course, this is all based on, what seems like eons of bravery from others and everything. And there is certainly a strong movement towards these things, real strong groundswell movement, but I feel like we need to get behind it more, right? As a reframing of what we do, from an environmental movement to a social movement. We can all work together. This is all the same. Black Lives Matter, climate change, COVID, it's all the same thing. It all comes down to structural violence. So this has been a lot of why, and now we are ready to get into the what and how. So it's long past time to tell this story. I borrowed this above image from Havelock Wool because I think it's just a really nice way to summarize this. Our fibers are produced here, our competitors' fibers are produced there. I mean, which one, just instinctually, which one do you think has a lower carbon impact and is healthier for the planet? Just take a guess. And your instinct is absolutely right. And then look below. This is me and my buddy Austin installing some wood fiber insulation and other stuff at a job site in Phoenix. This is like what we were wearing to do the full days of work. I mean, it's not toxic. And then look what you have to dress up in to install spray foam. It's like your work for the CDC fighting coronavirus. It's insane. So we're going to go through a tale of two insulation approaches and then a tale of two air barrier approaches here. I'm borrowing, worst of times, best of times, of course. And foam, mineral wool, fiberglass, they require ripping apart and dominating the natural world, and leads to suffering through displacement and economic hardships. Workers are exposed to extreme toxicity, poor working conditions, low wages during manufacturing and installation. And occupants suffer from mold, moisture failures, and sick building syndrome, right? That is structural violence right there. That's built into the products. Not all wood fiber is good. A lot of it's bad, but good wood fiber, good cork, and good wool are produced in harmony with nature to sustain environments that improve lives. Workers have healthy working environments, better paying jobs on average, and the occupants enjoy healthy, durable, and comfortable spaces. Visually, I don't think it's okay for us to risk our workers' lives, and I'd be pretty stoked if we stop fighting war for oil and stop polluting our communities. This is me at that same job site. Probably should have been wearing a mask. This is pre-COVID, but just, kicking up a lot of sawdust there. That forest there, that's where Gutex is made, the wood fiber insulation that I work with. Looking into the clouds, but basically within that horizon that you can see there, that's where all of the Gutex materials come from. That's just beautiful to me. And that is the Gutex factory in the lower right-hand corner, where they use cogen waste heat from a plant plus on-site solar, blah, 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 blah. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And we're going to go into a tale of two control layer approaches, which we're going to do a little more detail on here. And it's basically microporous membranes versus non-microporous membranes, which effectively means microporous membranes are like Gore-Tex jackets. They have literal holes in them. They need to be covered in a chemical. Well, it turns out that that chemical is quite toxic usually. Non-microporous membranes don't need a chemical. So produced using highly toxic chemicals such as PFOA or C8, which is a surfactant, which means basically it decreases surface tension so stuff doesn't break down. It helps separate things. So it's used on like Teflon, but it's also used in stuff like Tyvek and other membranes so that water sheds off of it. Or it used to be before it got banned. We're going to get into that story. Workers in the factory, the distribution chain, the job site are exposed to these chemicals. This is the subject of The Devil We Know and Dark Waters, the Mark Ruffalo movie recently. And occupants, again, suffer from failures, poor performance, and high maintenance. Non-microporous membranes are redless-free materials because they don't have to use toxic chemicals to be waterproof. Workers have healthy working environments and better paying jobs because these tend to be made in Europe, so that's just kind of how it's done there. And occupants rest easy knowing they didn't poison people, that they are going to be comfortable, and that they'll have minimal maintenance, right? So that's a pretty different social experience for those two things. I want to make sure I didn't skip anything in my notes here before we move into this, and I did not. So if you haven't seen this on Netflix, you can watch this, The Devil We Know. They also have a really nice website. And you can go see this yourself. I mean, this is the story that I mentioned at the Slam. That's James Bond, bad guy bad. It's beyond belief insane. But effectively, the title comes from the most callous document I ever read. It was something between like the chief medical director of DuPont and the CEO at the time. And it basically said, well, whatever, it's killing people and hurting our workers and probably poisoning the whole planet, but it's the devil we know. So like, let's just stick with it. And basically saying that if we admit that we know it's bad, then it opens us for a bunch of litigation, and we can't take that risk because we have fiduciary responsibility. So clearly, fiduciary responsibility doesn't really work for us. It works for the 1%. So these are some snapshots from the movie. The gentleman you see in the lower left corner had horrible birth defects that he's been suffering from, ridicule his whole life. But he's one of the most amazing individuals. You'll just be so inspired by him if you watch this. And it was just insane, right? They were guinea pigs, as the guy saying in the upper right. And this cover-up lasted 50 years. As early as 1961, DuPont knew its Teflon chemical, PFOA, was causing damage to lab animals, yet the company continued to use this chemical until 2013. A panel convened by President Obama to study the uptick in cancer rates found that the role of environmental contaminants to be grossly underestimated. PFOA is one of the leading, if not the leading, environmental contaminant because it has now been found in the blood of 99% of all Americans and 99% of all mammals on this planet. And the mind-boggling part? The entire story focuses on a white community and doesn't even mention how PFOA has had even worse impacts in communities of color. And if we're harshly honest, I don't know if C8 would have ended up being banned if it was a group of black farmers who had approached the white corporate attorney to take on DuPont. Maybe, I hope so, but I kind of doubt it. And taking it to our industry, I think this reiterates itself with this sentence or some iteration of this sentence. That work sucks. Let the blank guys do it. One of our biggest problems is that our culture allows us to assign dangerous and unhealthy work to those with less power. That's often younger people. Hey, this guy's new on the job. Poor people, undocumented people, especially LGBTQ plus people or people of color. There are a few bad apples who may actually push for this agenda, but I'm not trying to say it's the fault of a particular group or a particular person, but it's an element of our culture that we need to challenge. In fact, the whole concept of individualism is really the issue. This problem isn't caused by individuals affecting individuals. This is deep structural issues that built into the core culture of our society. Someone call the excavators because it's time to dig up the failed foundation and build a new one. Sorry for the cheesy dad joke. I tried it on my kids. They liked it. But I can't help it, another dad joke. Ideally, this time, let's build the foundation without concrete. And this is an extremely complex issue. And as mentioned, I'm certainly not the expert. But I've been trying hard to listen, to hear, and to become an ally for those with less power. What I can do is force this conversation into the mainstream until it's safe for the right people to lead. The 5 factors of good building approach has been very effective at getting people to measure and value carbon impacts. So my hope is that it can be used in the same way to bring social justice to the surface. We debated for a long time about revising the tool to include social justice, not because it isn't important, but because we aren't experts in this subject. With the other factors, we have deep expertise across decades of experience and thousands of projects. Sadly, it speaks to everything I've said about our culture that throughout these decades of experience and thousands of projects, I wasn't forced, incentivized, or even encouraged to collect data about social justice and green building. We were too busy focusing on efficiently delivering efficiency, which has too often meant buying a lot more products that hurt people and hurt the world. We got to stop this now. It's a broken cycle. A deeper challenge is that when we identify problems like this, we don't typically have an accessible framework to make improvements. The 5 factors tool was developed as an attempt to be that framework. So now that we've discussed why the 5 factors tool exists, we can discuss what it is exactly. The 5 factors is a design tool. It is not a certification. I make that clear because design tools can be harsh behind the scenes, where certifications aren't going to last very long if you're just kind of giving everyone bad scores. There's a perverse incentive of certifications to certify because otherwise the movement doesn't work. Not saying that certifications are bad by any means. It's just this is designed to be way more harsh than your standard certification. I want to bring out all the potential problems of the project if we can and make decisions on those. So it's designed to be blunt, transparent, to optimize decisions early in the process. And it's designed to guide an integrated approach towards truly good building, regardless of high performance budgets or low performance budgets. It works with both. It's designed to leverage behavioral psychology and gamification. People always want to maximize their score, regardless if they actually deeply care about why they're doing it. So brief story, I was working on a project in Phoenix. It's a big multifamily project. And we were trying to get the team to care. And there's a couple people that cared. One main person at the development company, younger guy. And then we ran the 5-factor score, and they got a very low score. I won't say exactly what it is, but it was very low. And all of a sudden, everyone in the company cares because they just had a bad score and wanted to have a good score. And digging into it, it really was just they didn't want to have a bad score. So it's amazing how much these like basic behavioral psychology things work. The goal is to maximize comfort, health, efficiency, and durability while minimizing embodied carbon and embodied injustice. This can be used as a tool to look at new construction, to look at retrofits, and I think most recently it's been most useful to look at individual products. So in our beta testing phase, it's been used by developers, homeowners, architects, builders. The tool provides a weighted average score out of 50 possible points based on over 200 points of performance across these 5-factor categories. We're still building out this embodied injustice category because clearly, as I mentioned, it's harder without being the expert, but we're trying to rely on as much expertise. And I am lucky enough to be married to an anthropologist, culture anthropologist. So that's there's a good connection to some very, very valuable data there. So to just show an example of what the score can look like, this is spray foam, right? Well, the efficiency, R value, and vapor control can be attractive. The carbon impact, toxicity, durability risks, and social justice issues balance out to provide a very low score overall. So sure, I'll give spray foam like an 8 on efficiency. It's low thermal mass, so it isn't that great. The R value is way overstated and such. But you know, overall, if we include the social justice side, the life cycle carbon side, et cetera, it's like a 16 point out of 50 point product. I think that makes it pretty clear. This is properly made, truly good dry press wood fiber board using, you know, Gutex, of course, is the example because that's the product I know. Steico is another big manufacturer in Europe. They'd probably get around the same score here, but this is looking at these holistic 5 factors, and it would get about 45 points. There's nothing that's perfect, but that just makes it very clear that I think foam blows and that wood fiber is worth using. So let's see, I wanna make sure also to note, when I say good wood, I usually mean FSC certified in North America. PEFC is a really solid certification in Germany. That's what Gutex uses actually, and a few other manufacturers there. So it changes, but in general, FSC is the gold standard. This 5 factors process is intended to be simple, efficient, transparent, low cost, and again, ideally done through a nonprofit model, and open source. So if people have ideas of how to change it, improve it, that'd be wonderful. So it usually starts with a brief intro Zoom to review plans and talk about why the project's happening, why certain goals are trying to be achieved, then providing a preliminary score. Then there's this 5 factors optimization process to try to get the score as high as possible, and then this output of truly good details to make it happen. So this process has started quite informally. We've worked almost entirely in the Southwest so far because that's where there's been a lot more need for help. But it would be wonderful as my colleagues and peers to you know, work on a couple projects with you guys. A dear friend of mine, Jay Gentry, he's a retired salesperson who decided to help use his skills to grow good building and telling stories. Now serves on the board for Paso Robles, California. He shared this graphic with me. It's the McLeamy curve. It's a summary of basically effort versus time and how that relates to our ability to control or reduce costs. It's kind of a fancy graphic to just say that building smart means you're building a lot of the effort up front into the design phase rather than waiting to being on job sites to kind of figure it out as you go, right? So the 5 factors tool is designed to bring as many of those really important decisions as early into the design process as possible. It's based on this kind of principle. And, you know, we actually also need to then build what we design. I cannot hear anymore, well, the sub hadn't heard of it, so we changed it. That's just an example of the power of extractive racial capitalism controlling mentality and reality. Like that's, you don't let conventional win, because we're in a precious time in history. I've heard this called the Great Pause. There's a wonderful article in The Atlantic that was written about this subject. And it's a moment where society is open to deep cultural change. I'm going to take a moment to read this quote. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and some people began to think differently. And the people healed in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, heartless ways. The earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. So let's start taking real action. Let's demand truly good building. We have to use truly good materials to do that. Let's also make sure that that action is not less bad, because if we have good action, then and only then hope will come, as Greta says. And please promise me you'll get out and vote, since right now that's more important than pretty much everything else we've just shared. If you notice my Grateful Dead obsession, one way or another, Starkness has got to give. And to circle back, remember that project I mentioned in LA? Well, honestly, that one turned out to be good enough low performance. We didn't get any photos we're sharing, but we did learn many lessons that have applied since then. But since we're the Northwest Eco Building Guild, I figured I'd share a more local example that worked out much better. And since we're going virtual world, and I know this is a white slide, this is intentional. We're going to my virtual world standing. There I was, virtually this time, not even wearing pants, but a nice button up and glasses, the outfit of a true pro for the pandemic times. And this Zoom is actually with the planning committee. It was the only Zoom photo I had. Looking at a gorgeous house in a gorgeous setting with a good buddy, an awesome builder named Flash. He was a pro skier, so he got a nickname stuck, who was desperate not to pollute the site with foam shavings and the world with embodied carbon of foam. The client was worried about all the toxicity issues, moisture failures, and fire risks they've heard about recently. Flash told them he would literally walk off the job if he had to install a single sheet of foam. The house was already framed and foam was actually already overdue to start. No pressure at this one. We were able to pull the architect, client, and other members of the team together for a last-minute Zoom. Imagine trying to schedule that in person in the before times. The 5 factors approach was used to efficiently discuss why foam was non-viable for the goals of meeting why the project was going to be built. So we talked about why, and that made it very clear that foam was not part of the how and what, and to illustrate which approaches would best meet everyone's goals. Despite originally being a nightmare of foam that would have scored roughly 15 out of 50 on the 5-factor score, we were able to collaborate with the whole team while the project was being framed to remove all of the foam and upgrade to a truly good, healthy, natural insulation and 100-plus year air sealing details. An otherwise great project, which overall would probably score in the high 30s, which is fantastic. Here is the roof system with wood fiber board insulation being stacked inside the rafter bays instead of foam boards. Due to changing last minute, we had to adapt the truly good materials to stick with the exact same design that had been permitted, which included a 1-inch ventilation channel above the insulation boards. So in order to create an airtight vented cavity, we used Viscon, this liquid applied membrane from Proclima, to air seal between the wood fiber boards. That's a little like black stripe you see, and the rafters. The white membrane you see below is Intello Plus, a vapor variable air barrier, serves as class 2 vapor retarder to meet code when using vapor permeable insulation. And we can, address any more questions about this assembly later, but it's really interesting assembly, the way it was put together, especially because it had to be swapped out, exactly the same. It was designed for foam, and we were able to pull it off in an under 2-hour Zoom call and switch to healthy natural materials without changing any of the details. And in the end, ended up with a completely foam-free site with, a non-toxic membrane with no PFOA or other nasty chemicals, protecting a very low slope roof. So pretty darn neat in the end. They also use local plywood for the sheathing. Pretty awesome in the end. So that was a spectacular little example of 5 factors working out well. Since I was given 90 minutes, I thought I'd also take extra time to show a tragic yet massive accomplishment. This is probably on my top 5 list in my career. So this guy you see presenting on the left there, that's Rob Nicely. He owns a company called Carmel Building and Design. Him and his amazing team work together to try to, he's on Passive House California's board along with Jay Gentry, and they collaborate all together around California's Central Coast. They're trying to build, I think, 1,000 passive houses by 2030. They're trying to do them with healthy, natural, carbon-storing materials. One of the big fears was, how are those materials going to act in fires? Gee, I wonder why the client was so concerned about that. And looking into detail here, just to say how cool this is, the woman you see in the front, the redhead, who looks super engaged with what's happening, she's actually the new, I think, city planning manager for Monterey. And they're trying to change code to basically require Truly Good Passive House as soon as they can. I mean, we're talking the next year or so. So it's just amazing to see this movement. But again, one of the big things people are concerned about was how healthy natural materials would perform in extreme fires. And it's very rare as a building scientist to get a real world example of your, I guess a real world experiment is a better way to put it, of an assembly design. And you don't want to, because it's tragic when it happens, but in this case we did. So yeah, this is the neighborhood. It was burned to the ground. Fire's so hot that guardrails collapsed. I mean, that's insane. This occurred when the passive house, they were just moving to the inside. They just finished like roughing and drywall basically. And, this is just east of the passive house. This is literally across the street from the passive house. This is looking west. This is looking down from the deck. The soil got so hot it crystallized. This is looking southeast from the deck, right? And it's just, there's devastation in this neighborhood, right? And working together, we came up with some rough rules, is a strong word. Guidelines is probably a better word, for low carbon fire safety. And I'm presenting to the city of Monterey next week on this subject, actually. But durable passive house level of air tightness or better is mission critical. High thermal mass insulation to keep temperature regulation, basically make it so it takes as long as possible for heat to move to the interior side of a building. And then you need to protect all that with ember-proof cladding and roofing so we don't get embers sparking fires. We also obviously need continuous fresh air from controlled sources, and it needs to be safe for firefighters to enter. California is about to disallow firefighters from entering any building that has had foam insulation installed because of how quickly and dangerously it burns. The stuff it off gases is incredibly nasty. Spray foam insulation in particular. But drum roll, please. This is the passive house after the fire. And it may have just gotten lucky. It's possible. But I think there's a more interesting story to be told than that. It has a durable air barrier installed to passive house standards. It was like 0.4 ACH50. It was protected by high thermal mass insulation. and then completely wrapped in ember-proof cladding and roofing. This is hardy board, proper double metal screens on the bottom, metal roof with proper intake vent. I mean, this is well done. They had proper WUI zone, wildland urban interface. California has pretty strict code about protecting the site from, you know, stuff being leaned up against the building, et cetera, et cetera. So with proper site protection and these three principles, this passive house made it through. And digging into this a little bit more, going to a basic sciences for, core principles kind of thing. High pressure moves to low pressure, right? And keep in mind the sun is basically a big ball of fire energy that's very, very far away, and forest fires are relatively small, but they're a lot closer, right? And when we have, a really leaky house on a hot sunny day, there's say 100-degree temperature outside, and let's say it's 70 degrees inside to start, that temperature is going to leak into the house and warm up the house. So that hot air that's at like 100 degrees moves into the house and warms up the house, right? But if you have a passive house, little Gandalf reference for you guys here, little Lord of the Rings, the passive house says to the air, you shall not pass. The air doesn't get in nearly as readily. Well, a fire is a very similar effect, except now we're talking about thousands of degrees Fahrenheit versus 70 degrees inside. And what happens is fires actually move in, the hyperheated air from fires moves in through air leakage, finds combustible stuff inside the building and flashes inside the building. If you look closely, you can see that this building is burning from the inside out. It's possible that an ember got into the attic or something, but that's not nearly as likely as the temperature moving in and finding something that can combust. And again, a passive house to some degree will say, you shall not pass. I mean, as long as the fire can't get directly against it, this next slide will explain it. So in your mind, looking at this visually, since that's how humans think, it would appear that these bigger buildings, which are supposed to be passive houses, are more at risk for the fire because they're closer to the fire. These little buildings in the middle would be at less risk, but fire doesn't see things visually. Fire sees things through pressure dynamic, right? So a passive house has a thick, durable air barrier, where these conventional houses don't have an air barrier, so they have a bunch of leakage. So they're the ones where the hot air moves in, and there's much higher risk of them burning down. This isn't to say the passive houses can't burn down. Of course they can, without following all the other stuff we talk about. And you could do everything in the world right, and it still could be an extreme enough event. Mother Nature is going to beat our butts anytime she wants to. But in general, you can get very close to fire safe. There's no such thing as being fully safe by following proper passive house design along with some fire safe principles. Another thing I'm throwing in because of extra time. My buddy Jacob Rakusin at New Frameworks in the East Coast, they were going to be joining us for a summit presentation that they do. It's very similar content, it turns out. He and I had a wonderful call last Friday, just like virtual hugs and everything. And it's all about climate justice, social justice, and all that. So I'm going to take you through a few slides of theirs, just to make sure that we're giving them the voice and showing some of the really cool stuff that's happening. And I guess really make the point that this movement is coast to coast at this point. So I love this. Will we answer the next generation with less bad or more good, right? And how do we fill in this missing middle? And it turns out this missing middle type design is the stuff that's easiest to make climate positive. So we can do it. It's exciting. It'll improve our lives, improve social justice, and save the world. Not too shabby. How is this house climate positive? This is one of their projects that they did. They've put together a carbon calculator. The one that I've used is usually just for the insulation and airtightness measures to the relative savings created by those performance measures. They've actually put together an upfront carbon calculator that includes, foundations through finishes, which is pretty amazing. And they ran this house through it. And this house up front had a net storage of about 30,000 pounds of carbon. So let that sink in. In Seattle, to let that, to kind of like baseline this for you, A passive house in Seattle on Seattle City Light Grid saves about 1,000 pounds of carbon a year. So this house built in 30 years of passive house operation in Seattle up front because it used healthy, durable, high-tech natural insulation. By our intentional actions, buildings can become the planet's 6th carbon sink. Making drawdown buildings is much less complicated than you might think, and the impact can be much greater than you might imagine. We're talking 36 million